Hello and welcome back. We're still on this amazing journey that we have dubbed and coined Zula. Now Zula, again, translates to discover. We are discovering the heritage of our country. We're going back in time to understand the historical economics of our country. And guess what? It's the 4th episode, and now we just introduced a new character. And that new character is none other than the current president of the country right now. Now we're going to be understanding his contribution and how he joins the picture here on Zula. Well, the third portion of Musevenomics asks how and what was the magnitude of the collapse of Uganda's economy between 1971 and 1986. To answer this question, we have to examine the economy of Uganda through the different regimes of Idi Amin Dada, Yusuf Lule, Godfrey Binayisa, Obote II, and Tito Okello Lutwa. The rise of General Idi Amin Dada to power was so much welcomed by the people from the central region and those of his ethnicity. Nevertheless, Idi Amin's policies left the economy devastated. For example, the expulsion of Asians and the nationalization of businesses and industries. Now the expulsion of Asians raised a lot of eyebrows, there are mixed reactions, the economy got its stake. But we're going to find out a little bit more of what happened therein. The economy before the collapse was thriving due to the dominance of the Asians having worked with the British regime. They were very conversant with trade, seeing that all economic policies favored them. This ensured their success. It is, however, important to note that all this success was at the expense of the Ugandan nationals, especially the Baganda. The discontent Baganda group, who had for long been denied license under the National Coffee Association, wrote a letter to His Excellency Idi Amin Dada, President of Uganda, informing him that the Indian community had been corrupting police officers, taking his government for a joke. Now this provided Amin with the opportunity to play a role of a nationalist by accusing the Asians of being anti-Uganda, anti-Africa, frustrating the efforts of Africans to participate in the commercial life of the country, exporting a large sum of money illegally to Europe and to North America. Now, it's also important to note that the Asians had all the expertise that was required in business, accounting, they had sales, they had management skills, and expelling them at such a crucial time would leave the country in turmoil. In the speech that announced it, Amin declared the economic war as the day of salvation for Uganda, for Ugandan Africans. Was it true? That's for you to expound on and get back to us in the comment section below. This is the day of redemption of the Ugandan Africans. All Ugandans must wake up. Full and total mobilization, determined and committed to fight this economic war until this is won. Was this victory for Uganda's economy, or were we digging our own grave? By the end of 1972, 5,655 farms, ranches, and estates had been vacated by the departed Asian community. Contrary to what has been said and going around, the abandoned properties were not carelessly allocated to Ugandan citizens but fell under the custodian of a new bureaucracy, the Departed Asians Property Custodian Board, which allocated houses and business premises to African tenants. In the months that followed the expulsion of the Asians, he made surprise tours to Kampala's businesses 2 or 3 times a week. On every tour of inspection, he would give directions. He would tell a businessman to change his method of work, rearrange stock to keep better records. Now this also tells you that Idi Amin Dada was not only a president but also a businessman. If you're doubting his business tactics, that is for you to answer in the comment sections below. But this is what he did to ensure the continuity of these businesses, contrary to what has been said, that all he did was to give out these things for his people to eat and enjoy. Now, therefore, it is right to say that Uganda first got her economic independence of 1972 when all businesses were totally run by Ugandan natives. That is a discussion for you to have if you doubt. However, the economic independence was to Ugandan natives as a young child who has inherited a multi-million business and property which he has limited or no knowledge to run. For example, the cost of imported and manufactured goods rose dramatically in Ugandan marketplaces in the later months of 1973. It was difficult to keep the pace with the rate of price inflation according to Derek R. Peterson, an American historian specializing in cultural history of East Africa, in his book Government Work in Idi Amin's Uganda. According to Peterson's narration, in October 1973, about a year after the Asians were expelled, a cup of tea purchased in Kampala, priced at 3 shillings and 50 cents in 1972, cost 10 shillings. Primus stoves that had costed 45 shillings in 1972 had doubled in price. Suits of clothes that had formerly costed 700 shillings were priced at 1,300. The Amin government responded to the inflationary pressure on prices by formulating trading corporations by presidential decree in 1972. It had a legal monopoly over the import and export of commodities. There was fixed prices for goods sold to consumers. And in every district, there were government-appointed agents who were responsible for the distribution of commodities. The agents exercised monopoly powers. In other words, there was nobody, you had no mandate whatsoever to talk about pricing and all the legalities. In Fort Portal, there were 8 grocers who were authorized by government to sell commodities at controlled prices. Bundibujo's leading businessman Haji Juma was the government agent for Bata Shoes, the voice of Uganda newspapers, fishing nets and textiles. Now Bata Shoes had already come to Uganda at that time. Early in 1975, President Amin appointed an economic crimes tribunal. The judges were military men empowered to investigate and prosecute profiteers, hoarders and others who acted against the economic interests of the state. The penalty was death. And the penalty was death by the firing squad or 10 years of prison. Canadian diplomats reported that Abdallah Nasser, the governor of the Central Province, spent his time making surprise visits to various business establishments, finding them in breach of various written or unwritten government regulations, clothing their business and allocating them to new owners. In one case, the tribunal ordered the execution of 24 of men who were found attempting to smuggle 500 bags of coffee outside the country. Now, the targets of the Economic Crimes Tribunal were people without connections, petty traders, market women, people whose financial strategies ran on a foul government edicts. However, it's also important to note that Idi Amin made an outstanding reform in land administration of Uganda. The declaration of only one land tenure system, freehold and no crown land. By this time, President Idi Amin Dada's relationship with the British worsened, and he couldn't easily get money from them to inject in the country's economy. So as a result, he strengthened his relationship with the Islamic states and ran to them for finances. With shortages in finances to run the economy, Uganda experienced a sharp decline in the national GDP from 3% to 0.7%. What a decline. Uganda National Coffee Association members acquired trading licenses. Land titles were null and void due to Idi Amin's land reforms, and East African community had already collapsed due to Idi Amin's notorious acts. In other words, his fellows could not stand him anymore. Worse than that, the numerous murders of the various charismatic leaders of the various people through the country, Idi Amin lost geographical leverage. Most of these murders were as a result of the unconfirmed allegations against such people. Now, it's important to note that during that time, a lot of people lost their lives. The people whose leaders and loved ones had been killed during Idi Amin's reign felt insecure with him as president. This forced them to leave the country and rise many rebel groups against the government. In September 1972, a group of exiles attacked the government of Idi Amin Dada, but their endeavors failed. However, in 1979, when Idi Amin Dada, in his expansionist efforts, attacked Kagera in northern Tanzania, he initiated the Uganda-Tanzania War. The president of Tanzania, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, ordered the Tanzania People's Defense Force to counterattack, and he mobilized the exile Uganda militia to join him in the overthrow of Idi Amin Dada. After Amin's overthrow, Uganda went through a period of dramatic transfer of power, and in a period of just 2 years, Uganda had been led by 3 presidents, Yusuf Lule, Lukongwa Binayisa, and Paul Muwanga. To end this drama, general elections were held, and Dr. Milton Obote emerged as the winner in December 1980. Nevertheless, the election results were disputed by many, including Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who resorted to starting a rebellion in what is famously known as the Bush War. Yoweri Museveni first named the rebel group the Popular Resistance Army. Needful to say is that Museveni was not the only rebel by then against Obote's second presidency over Uganda. The rebel groups included the following: Colonel Isaac Nkwanga's FEDEMU, Andrew Kaira's Uganda Freedom Fighters Movement, Moses Ali's National Rescue Front, and Alex Onama's FUNA from the Uganda National Army. Contrary to what has been said about Museveni receiving instant support from Baganda, his Popular Resistance Army (PRA) rebel group had been rejected in Luweero. The Baganda had wanted Museveni to wage war in his area in Ankole and not from their region. But this would have been suicidal because Ankole had been a strong supporter for the UPC, with UPC diehards like Rurangaranga Edward and Chris Rakasisi. Following this rejection, Museveni sought to join forces with Yusuf Lule's Uganda Freedom Fighters, whose opposition against the government had not been armed. After a series of meetings and dialogues, Museveni and Yusuf Lule formed an alliance and formed a merger called the National Resistance Army. Yusuf Lule could become the chairman of the NRA, assisted by 2 vice chairmen, Yoweri Museveni in charge of operations and Haji Musa Chigongo in charge of political affairs. With this agreement, Museveni was now able to knock on the doors of Ugandans in the central region and say that he was fighting under Yusuf Lule, who would then become the president again after the overthrow of Obote. From that point, Ugandans started concealing Museveni's rebels from government troops and supplying them with food and necessities. Now this started to give Museveni an entrance in central Uganda, and he gained a lot of favor. This right here marks the climax of this episode. Catch me in the next episode as we dive deep, and now we understand how Museveni now moves and travels through his journey, through his bush war, until he becomes president.